All right, we'll say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors this morning. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Steve and Terry Zinn, for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month in memory of their parents, Tzvi Hirsch ben Yosef HaKohen, Yentel Mindel Bas David Halevi, Bunim Tzvi ben Chaim, and Devorah Bas Israel Yoel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. And Abosai, with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Nun Beis 52, and we are picking up in Mirat Hashem on the bottom of Nun Aleph Amud Beis 51b, literally the bottom line. So it says the Gemara, thank you, Rabba Barav Chanon, Havaragil da'asi me'artivna lepumpadisa. So it's an interesting case. Rabba Barav Chanon used to regularly travel between Artivna and Pumpadisa. Now Rashi points out over here, look at the bottom Rashi, Nun Aleph Amud Beis, Ragil da'asi b'chol Shabbos ma'artivna lepumpadisa, top of Nun Beis, v'haya yoshev erev Shabbos bebeis, v'omer shvisasi b'tzinsa makom musum haya ben shnei tchumen. So again, so let me read the rest of the line. So Rabba Barav Chanan used to travel from Artivna to Pumpadisa on erev Shabbos, or I should say on Shabbos. But what happened? Top of Nun Beis, Amar Teishi Sasi b'tzinsa. So what he would do is, he would go ahead and on Erev Shabbos he would say, allow my makom shvisa to be in Tzimsa. Now what was the chap of Tzimsa? So Tzimsa was within 2,000 amas of his current location, and of Artivna, and within 2,000 amas of Pumpadisa. So essentially what Rabbi Barav Chanan is doing is establishing a forward makom shvisa. He's sitting in his house, just to be clear on the parameter, on the case over here, he's sitting in his house on Erev Shabbos. He's declaring a forward makom shvisa. Amalei Abaye my daiteich. Abaye says, I don't understand. Well, why do you think you can do this? Rashi says, my daiteich the ashir at va'amar shvisasi b'makom ploni. Both remember again, we were discussing in yesterday's daf the fascinating machlokes regarding whether or not the ability to establish a forward makom shvisa, is that limited to what we call an ani? Now remember, as you pointed out yesterday, ani doesn't literally mean pauper, but rather what does ani mean in this context? A traveler. Or does it apply even to an ashir? Again, ashir in this context means someone who is sitting comfortably at home. So Abaye says to Rabbi Barav Chanan, I don't understand. Why do you think that you could establish a makom shvisa, a forward makom shvisa, sitting in your house? After all, again, the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Huda, Lach Rabbi Huda. Whenever there's a machlokes in Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Huda, the halacha follows Rabbi Huda, va'am Rav Chisda, machlokes b'makom ploni, v'ha Rav Nachman v'tanya kavase. So we'll say ultimately, again, so Abaye keeps proving, ultimately again to Rabba, that even the ability to establish a forward makom shvisa is dafka bimkomi if you're there. But to go ahead and be sitting in your home and establish a forward makom shvisa, you're not allowed to do that. So the Gemara says, Amalei Hadribi. So Rabbi says, you're right, I retracted my position. This is what I used to do, but then I learned the halacha. I was a Baal Tshuva, this is the season, I was a Baal Tshuva, and therefore again I stopped establishing a forward makom shvisa from my home. So I'll say, this is an important story, because remember again, in general, we've been learning long enough to know that a lot of times the stories that we hear are incredibly important in terms of the resolution of the halacha, because the stories tell us how the machloksim played out in real life. So here you have Rabbi Barav Chanan establishing a forward makom shvisa while sitting in his home. In other words, apparently conducting himself as if an ashir has the ability to establish a forward makom shvisa, but yet being told by Abaye that's not really the halacha. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Barav Chama, Amar Rami Bar Chama. Hari Amru Shabbos Yesh Lo Dalaram. So we'll say now an unrelated halacha. We'll resolve the halacha in just a moment. Let's listen to this. So Rami Bar Chama says as follows. He says, in general, we say that on Shabbos you have dalaramas. You have dalaramas. Look at Rashi. Shabbos Shekonu Shvisa Baraglav Yesh Lo Dalaramas Leknias Bayis Levar Me'apayim L'Chorach. So we'll say in general the halacha is as follows. If you establish a makom shvisa with your guf, with your body, right? So I go ahead and I say, Kantei shvisasi. This is my makom shvisa right here. So I say, interestingly enough, so obviously, what does that do for me? That gives me 2,000 amas forward. But it doesn't just give me 2,000 amas, because remember, wherever you are, what else do you automatically have? What do you have? Dalet Amas, which means that in fact you actually have 2004 Amas. It's an interesting little fact. So when you establish a Makom Shvisa, you actually don't just have 2000, you have 2004 Amas. Okay, now here's the interesting question. Hanosin Eruvo, Yesh Lo Dalet Amas Alom. So both say, so literally what happens if you place your Eruv? So what this is talking about is as follows. In a situation where, let's say, I'm using food to establish a Makom Shvisa. So we've already established what is the benefit of using food to establish your Makom Shvisa. The benefit is what? Is what? You don't have to be there. Right? You don't have to be there. I could send my Eruv biyad acher. I could establish a shaliach and go ahead and send the shaliach and deposit my food in a particular place. So we'll say, see here the shaila? So the shaila now the Gemara says is, I understand if I establish my Makom Shvisa with my person, I come to a place and I say, this is my Makom Shvisa, so I really have 2004 Amas, right? I have my 4 Amas, my Dalet Amas, and then my Tchum really begins being counted from the edge of my personal Dalet Amas. What happens if I send my Eruv with someone else? I sent food, so I establish a Makom Shvisa, I put 2 chalas, in a place a few thousand, or whatever it is, 1,000 Amas away. So do I have 2,000 Amas where my chalas are, or 2004? So the Gemara says, Amar Rava Tashma, Lo Amru Ma'avim Mapas Allah Hakil Allah Ashir, Shelo Yetzive Arv Beraglov, the Amrit Ein Lo, Hay Lahakil Lahachmihu. So what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that in reality, everyone agrees. Of course, you can go ahead and establish a Makom Shvisa with your person, but the rabbis allowed you, Chazal allowed you to establish a Makom Shvisa with food. For what purpose? Lahakel. Lahakel also means to make things easier on you, which makes sense. Because this way, again, I could send food with a shaliach. I don't have to go myself to the Makom Shvisa and place my food there. So the Gemara says, well, if you say that when you establish a Makom Shvisa with food, i.e. not your person, that you don't get 2004 Amas, you only get 2,000 Amas, you mean on the Dalet Amas, then using food is not a kula, using food is what? A chumrah. Because if I make the Makom Shvisa myself, I get 2004 Amas. But if I go ahead and I make the Makom Shvisa with food, I only get 2,000 Amas. That's not a kul, that's a chumrah. So he says, no, that's not true. So the Gemara says, no, even if you want to say that halacha l'maisa, you don't get the Dalet Amas. Ultimately, again, if you use food, the kula is still the ability for me to make the Eruv without having to do it myself. In other words, I will say the loss of the extra 6 feet of mobility pales in comparison with my ability to go ahead and send someone else to do this on my behalf. In other words, the need to go ahead and establish a Makom Shvisa yourself on Erev Shabbos is a big thing. The ability to go ahead and send someone else to do it on my behalf is a significant kula. And that's still called a kula, even if I miss out on my Dalet Amas. So as I say, interestingly enough, the Gemara does not seem to resolve this over here. The Gemara doesn't seem to actually give an answer, so this seems to be still Sharei b'machlokas. So I will say, just allow me to close out the last piece. So remember again, the last sugya we had, listen to this. So the Shulchan Aruch, I'm just going to read this to you very quickly. You could look at this on your own, and it's kidai, because I will say, again, just as an aside, in general, in Daf Yomi, when we're moving at such a fast pace, so the ability to walk away with a little bit of halacha l'maisa and just see halachas in the Shulchan Aruch, even if you don't go so deep into them, in other words, even without Mishnah Berurah or anything, just to see Shulchan Aruch is very important. So this is Siman Taf Tes Halacha Yud Aleph. Misha Baba Derech. So we'll say, so this is the halacha concerning a forward Makom Shvisa. So Misha Baba Derech Umakir Ilan Ogeder Besof Alpaim Amal. V'yari Shem Atechshach Kodem Shiagia Sham. V'amar Shvisasi Tachtav Bi'ikaro. Kana Shvisa Bi'ikaro. V'yeshel Misham Alpaim Amal. So we'll say, so halacha number 1 is you can establish a forward Makom Shvisa. Right? You're traveling on Erev Shabbos. You want to create a forward Makom Shvisa in a place that is within your current 2,000 Amas. And within 2,000 Amas from where you currently are, you can do that. But qualification number 1, we'll say we saw in yesterday's daf, you have to be able to reach that place before Shabbos starts. Even if you could only reach it technically by running, it has to be reachable before Shabbos. We'll say this is very important halacha. So you could establish a forward Makom Shvisa, but you have to have the ability to reach there before the beginning of Shabbos. Even if you could only reach there, even if you couldn't get there walking normally, but only through running, that's okay. Aval, im lo haya yachal lagia sham klal mi ba'od yom, lo yazos mimkomo. You cannot reach the forward makom shvisa before the start of Shabbos, even through running. Then you cannot acquire it as a forward makom shvisa. Your makom shvisa becomes where you presently are, and you have 2,000 amos from there. The dafka sheyichei dalet amos emusach alpayim. I will say furthermore, establishing a forward makom shvisa only works if what? If you identify a specific dalet amma area. This goes back to Yom Kippur's daf. This is what we learned on Yom Kippur together. Right? So identifying a general area does not work. You must identify a specific dalet amas area. Kiyon sha'amar shvisase be'ikaro. U'meikan ve'ikaro avalim kala ilam b'soch apayim v'lo yiched makom tachtov lo kana shvisa. So what says halacha l'maisa, the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if you don't identify a 4 amma space, the establishment of a forward makom shvisa doesn't work. Another qualification, this is in Sif Yud Beis. If there are 2 people traveling together, we saw this in yesterday's daf, 2 people traveling together, one knows of a specific forward makom shvisa and one does not, the one who does not could yield his makom shvisa making ability to the one who does, and the one who does could establish a forward makom shvisa for both of them. One last qualification, I will say this is how we end the sugya. This is in Sif Yud Gimel. V'dafka leba baderech itir lo kahai gavna, avalo lemishu beveso. So I'll say halacha l'maisa. This is very important. This ability to establish a forward makom shvisa is reserved for what the Gemara called an ani, which again we identify as a traveler. Very important halacha. This concept, the ability to establish a forward makom shvisa, is dafka for someone who is traveling. This was a kula that Chazal made for someone who's traveling. But if you're sitting in your home and you decide that you want a forward makom shvisa, that does not work. Okay, boss. So now you got at least a little taste of the halacha l'maisa for this. You're good. Mishnah. We'll say another fascinating Mishnah. Mishnah lelich be'ir shema arvin ba. So we actually mentioned this Mishnah in yesterday's daf. So if someone goes ahead and sets out to travel to a city, Shema Arvin Ba. Now we'll say we'll see exactly what this means. But by Pashtos, we're talking about over here, you set out to another city which is within 4,000 amas of where you are. So which essentially means is these 2 cities have a little bit of an overlapping tchum, or at least tchumin that come right next to each other. So what happens? So I set out Erev Shabbos, I'm in city A. I set out on Erev Shabbos to go to city B, right? And city B ultimately, again, is within 4,000 amas of my current location. So what happened? So we'll say what happens. Then my friend tells me to turn around. And we'll say again, we'll see in the Gemara, he tells you, it's too hot to travel, it's too rainy to travel, whatever it is, he turns me around. So what happens? So we'll say the halacha is, actually very interesting, because I set out on the journey on Erev Shabbos, even though I turned around, I am permitted to travel to the other city. Now we'll have to see why that is. Why am I permitted to travel 4,000 amos? We'll discuss that. But the other residents of my city are not permitted. Div Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Meir says, Kol shu yachala arev v'lo irev harei ze chamar gamal. So Rabbi Meir says at the end of the day, that halacha l'maaseh, anyone who could have made a real eruv, meaning who could have established a real makom shvisa, let's say again with food, but did not do so, although he technically speaking may be able to travel and extend, although he may have established some level of makom shvisa, he becomes a chamar gamal. We'll define the parameters of this case as well. But we'll say chamar gamal is that term that Chazal always use. Remember again, you lead the camel from the front and the donkey from the back. So that's always a lashon that's used to mean that when measuring your tchum, we measure it in a way that puts you at a disadvantage. So you lose space in both directions. We'll see what that means. Says the Gemara, so let's go back to this first case because it's very strange. Right? So I set out to go from city A to city B on Erev Shabbos. There's 4,000 or less amas that divide these 2 cities. I set out to go. My friend turns me back. He says, don't go. So what did the Mishnah say? I can go on Shabbos if I want to, but the residents of my city cannot. Why? The Gemara says, in other words, why would I be permitted to go? Rav Huna, oh no, what's the case? Hacham asking, what's the case we're dealing with over here? Kigon sheyesh lo shnei batim ubenehen shnei tchumei Shabbos. We'll say, oh, here's the case. The case is, Baruch Hashem, I have two homes. One in city A and one in city B. Now it happens, I will say, that again, there's approximately 4,000 or less amas in between the two cities. So the two tchumin mamish come right up next to each other. So watch this. Ihu, when it comes to me, kevan dinafik leila archa havi le ani. So we'll say, this is very interesting. Since I went ahead and I set out on the journey, right? I set out on Erev Shabbos. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, I have the status of a traveler. Because I have the status of a traveler, therefore what? I established a forward makom shvisa, and because I established a forward makom shvisa, therefore I can travel between the two cities. Look at Rashi. Kevan shechsik baderach. It's almost right across in Rashi. Kevan shechsik baderach kana eruv. Af imlo amar shvisa si bisofa tchum v'chazar. So I will say this is very interesting. So apparently, what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows: since I set out on the journey on Erev Shabbos, and it was clear what the intention of my journey was, I established a forward makom shvisa, even if I never made a declaration to that effect. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, I could travel to city B on Shabbos. Masha'inki, the other residents of my city, because they did not go ahead and what? Because they did not set out and travel on Erev Shabbos, therefore they did not acquire a forward makom shvisa. So Rabbi say, this is a really dramatic halacha, because what do you see happening over here? You see now the ability, what sounds like what's happening over here in this Gemara is that the individual who set out on Erev Shabbos is establishing a forward makom shvisa, even though what? He never actually made a declaration to that effect. In other words, what we are doing is we are gleaning a declaration from his behaviors, which is just dramatically amazing. That what we're seeing is, you intended to, you did. You set out to travel from city A to city B on Erev Shabbos. Your chaver turned you around, but it's clear what your intention was. Your intention generates a forward makom shvisa. Incredible, absolutely incredible. It's incredible. So it says the Gemara, that supports this. Someone had two homes. And between those two homes are two tchumei Shabbos. So what happens? Kevan shechsik baderech kana eruv divrei Rabbi Huda. So as soon as I go ahead and I begin the journey to get to city B on Erev Shabbos, halacha l'maisa, I acquire a forward makom shvisa. These are the words of Rabbi Huda. Yes, I can Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda. Afilu matzach haverova amrlo lin po eschamahu estzinahu lemachar mashkim v'hoich. Both say not only that, but even if I embark on the journey, and my friend tells me, you know what? Why don't you go ahead and just stay here? Just stay over, right? Just stay over. It's too cold. It's too hot. It's too this. The next morning, I could continue on having established my forward makom shvisa. So it's a really, really an incredible, incredible halacha. So just so you should know, I'm gonna wait with halacha l'mais in just a moment because we'll just finish this little piece over here. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rabba. So Rabba says, we'll say to qualify this halacha. Rabba says, Lomar kuli amalo pligi ditzarich ki pligi lahachzik. So we'll say Rabba says everyone agrees though that in order for you to establish your forward makom shvisa, you must have made some type of declaration of intent. I say Rashi actually quotes a couple of different explanations. I'm just going to go with the Pashup Shad. So Rabbi says that everyone agrees that in order to establish a forward makom shvisa, you have to make some declaration of intent. I'm traveling from city A to city B. However, ki pligi lahachzik. The machlokes I will say is, do you actually have to have begun the journey? Right? In other words, is it enough to say, to express your intention, or do you actually have to have begun the journey to city B? Rabbi Yosef Amar lahachzik tu kuli amalo pligi. No, Rabbi Yosef is just the opposite. He says everyone agrees that in order to establish a forward makom shvisa, you must have begun the journey. Ki pligi lomar. Rather, the machlokes is, do you have to have actually any kind of expression of intent? So says the Gemara. Okay, so let's analyze. Kiman azlahada amar ula. So we'll say whose opinion is is reflected in the following statement of Ula. What did Ula say? Supposed to listen to this case. I was traveling from city A to city B on Erev Shabbos, and my friend turned me around. Supposed to, again, obviously, it's not talking about any case of physical force. My friend turned me around. Is talking about, again, my friend told me it's too hot, it's too this, it's too that. So the Gemara says, Ve'zir chavero, harehu muchzar umuchzak. Supposed to listen to this lashon. So therefore, I am muchzar and muchzak. Muchzar means what? I'm turned around, I'm returned to my original location. Muchzak means I'm established in that journey, which sounds like I have acquired a forward makom shvisa, to which the Gemara says that's two contradictory terms. Im muchzar lama muchzak, v'i muchzak lama muchzar. So I don't understand. If I'm muchzak, then why am I supposed to say again? You understand? If I'm muchzak, how could I be muchzar? And if I'm muchzar, how could I be muchzak? Hachi kamar, afa pisha muchzar muchzak. What it means supposed to say is, even though ultimately, again, I turned around or I did not proceed with the journey, nevertheless, I am muchzak in the journey. So, Kiman, whose opinion does this reflect? Kiman, Rav Yosef va'alibad Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda will say it's like Rav Yosef in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so we'll say, so that's fine. So the Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda bar Ishta, Rabbi Yehuda, so we'll say, I just want to, I'm just chomping at the bit to give you the halacha lamaisa, but I'm going to have to hold myself back just for a few moments. So the Gemara says, well, let's just do the story. So it says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda bar Ishta. So we'll say, so therefore again, what you have over here is this dramatic idea that halacha lamaisa, if I go ahead and set out from city A to city B, and then I get turned around by my friend. We'll say, by the way, you see from here an incredible musar of the need to have good friends. Because sometimes in life, you start out on a journey, and it's easy for your friends to turn you around. So it depends on the friends you have, because sometimes you're going down the wrong path. Sometimes if you have a good chaver, or you have good chaverim, nobody really has good chaverim. At most you have a good chaver. Right? So they say if you have a good chaver, so that chaver will prevent you from going down the wrong path. But if you have a bad chaver, sometimes unfortunately, again, you want to take a good path in life and your chaver turns you around. So important to make sure you're surrounding yourself with the right people. So the Gemara says, so we'll say what we're beginning to see is as follows, that if you begin a journey between city A and city B, even if you get quote unquote turned around, you could establish essentially a forward makom shvisa. The shaila is, what do you need in order to make that work? Do you need an expression of intent? Or is it just enough, or do you need an expression of intent? Or do you need to actually have begun the journey? Or what is it that is necessary in order for me to establish that forward makom shisa? So that's the machlokes Rabbah and Rav Yosef. We'll see halacha l'maisa in just a moment. So the Gemara tells a story. Rav Yehuda bar Ishta, I see the kalkala the period Rav Nassan bar Oshia. So let's listen to this. Rav Yehuda brought a basket of fruit to Rav Nassan bar Oshia. Beautiful. Kiyava Azil. So we'll say, so what happens? So now this is all happening on Erev Shabbos. So we'll say, so now what happens? So now Rav Yehuda is going back home. So Kiyava Azil, as Rav Yehuda was going back, Shafki adinochis darga. So Rav Nassan waited Rav Yehuda to go down one step. So to begin the journey back home, to go down one step. Amarle beis hacha. And then, interestingly enough, so Rav Nassan said to Rabbi Yehuda, you know what, why don't you just stay here? Just stay here, and you'll go home tomorrow. And I will say, now Rashi points out something very important here, which is that halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yehuda's home was within 4,000 amis of Rav Nassan. So Rav Yehuda's intention was, he traveled Erev Shabbos to give Rav Nassan the basket of fruit. He delivered the basket of fruit. Now he was going to go home. So look what happened. Rav Nassan waited Rabbi Yehuda to leave the house, take a step back home. Then Rav Nassan says to Rabbi Yehuda, you know what? Stay. You'll go home tomorrow. So what happens? The Gemara says, L'machar kadim va'azil. So Rabbi Yehuda listened, and ultimately again, Rabbi Yehuda listened, and he went back home tomorrow. He went back home the next day, Shabbos. So I will say, so what are the Amud Beis? It says the Gemara Kiman. So I will say, whose opinion does that reflect? So it says the Gemara, that is Rav Yosef va'aliba de Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. So also what that sounds like is Rav Yosef, according to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Because also what does Rabbi Yosef say? That halacha l'maisa, you have to begin the journey. So apparently what happened over here is that Rav Nosson waits for Rabbi Yehuda to what? To take a step. Once he took a step, he's muchzak. Once he's muchzak, he establishes a forward makom shvisa, and now even if he's turned around, he still has the ability to go back home on Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Lo kiraba ba'ali Rabbi Yehuda. So as I say, interestingly enough, in other words, there's nothing in this story. It's also quite possible that as Rabbi Yehuda left, or as he was about to turn around, he made an expression of intent. Right? In other words, there's nothing in the story that tells us what he did or what he didn't say. While it is true, I know from the story that Rav Nosson waited for Rabbi Yehuda to take a step. That is true. But for all I know, there was an expression, a verbal expression of intent as well. So the point that the Gemara is making is you cannot glean all of the circumstances from what we read over here. So I'll say, so just an interesting, so let me just tell you a little bit of halacha l'maisa over here, because this is really quite fascinating. So this is the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Yud. So we're just next Siman that we just read. So listen to this, I will say. So the Shulchan Aruch says as follows: Mishen is kavin likbosh visaso b'makom yadua etzlo v'hechzik baderech v'halach kidei sheyagia la'oso makom v'yikne bo shvisa. So let's listen to this. So now again, my intention is to travel from city A to city B, right? And again, I have in mind that I want to establish a forward makom shvisa. Hafa pishalo igia v'lo amad sham el hechziru chavero lolun etzlo o shechazar me'atzo lolun o shenisakev yesh lo lahalich lemachar makom sheniskavin lo ma'osa makom apayim amashkrim l'chol ruach shekevan shegamar belibo likbo sham shvisaso v'hechzik baderech nasa kimisha amad sham o shenech eruvo sham. So we'll say, so again, fascinating idea. So now I set out on a journey from city A to city B. For whatever the reason, I don't reach the forward makom shvisa, either because my friend turns me around, I get too tired, it's too hot, it's too cold, but lamaisa, again, it was clearly my intent, and I began the journey towards it. I acquire the makom shvisa, which also tells you something very interesting, which is even a lack of verbal intent, right, does not preclude me from establishing the makom shvisa, as long as I was actually muchzak, as long as I actually began the journey. So as long as on Erev Shabbos I began the journey towards my forward makom shvisa, I established as a forward makom shvisa. Now once again the Shulchan Aruch says, when is this so? Ba'ani shematrichnos alaniach eruv obirachok kigon shahaya babaderach aval lo haya ani v'lo rachok lo. So I say obviously this only works if what? This only works if either you're a traveler or the forward makom shvisa is far away. But Lamaisa, what again, this goes back to what we saw in Siman Tov Tes. Halacha Lamaisa doesn't apply for an Ashir. In other words, you can't exploit this halacha because you are lazy. So listen to this. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch then gives a couple of other interesting halachas. He says one more time. What does it mean to be hook? So what we've established is, in order to go ahead and acquire a forward makom shvisa, all you need, you don't even need the verbal declaration. Rather, you just have to set out on the journey. What's considered to be huchsak baderech? So here the Shulchan Aruch says, afilu yarad min ha'aliyah leilech la'osa makom. We'll say even taking one step. That's the story, right? Even taking one step is enough ultimately, again, to establish yourself as huchsak baderech. Good. So we'll say that's the halacha there. So let's go a little bit weiter. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Meir Omer Kol Shiachal La'arei. So remember, Rabbi Meir said in the Mishnah that anyone who has the ability to go ahead and make an eruv. Now Rabbi Meir seems to be referring to anyone who has the ability to make a real eruv, right? Depositing mazon beis seudos, or actually go ahead and be there with your physical presence. Not just go ahead and do something, and not just go ahead and make a declaration, but doesn't do so. So ultimately, again, it's chamer gamol. So says the Gemara, hatanina chadazin. We already learned this once before. Safek, in any case of safek eruv, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda omrim harizeh chamer gamol. So we'll say in general, in any case of safek. In other words, we'll say in any case where the eruv you made is not crystal clear, you're always subject to chamer gamol. That's just always the way that it works. So says the Gemara, so why the need to mention this again? Amarav Sheshas lo tema taima Rabbi Meir safek eruv, safek lo eruv. Hu dahavi chamer gamal. So we'll say, because you might have thought as follows. Maybe Rabbi Meir only holds chamer gamal. So we'll say, remember again, chamer gamal. Remember, we'll say, we had this on Yom Kippur. We've had it a couple of times already. But remember again, we'll say, this gets into the whole discussion. For example, just to illustrate this very simply, if let's say you were miyached a tree as a makom shvisa, and it was yet you did not identify a specific Dalit Amma area underneath the tree. And let's say again the tree itself spans 20 amas. 20 amas. So we'll say, so what does Chamar Gamal mean? So Chamar Gamal would mean that, let's say, for example, let's say you want your Tchum to be measured from the north. So where would you start counting? Where would you start counting the 2,000 amas from? Where would you start counting it from? The southern side of the tree. That again, I will say, you lose the 20 amas span of the tree. That means Chamar Gamal. So if you wanted to count from the south, you would begin counting from the northern side of the tree. So that means you lose that entire span of the ambiguous area. That's Chamar Gamal. So the Gemara says, we've already learned that before, that in any case where there's any level of doubt, any level of suffix regarding your Eruv, so halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and we say Chamar Gamal, to which the Gemara says, Aval vadai lo Eruv, lo havi Chamar Gamal. So the Gemara says, but I would have thought as follows. I'm sorry, let me read that once more. So time with Reb Meir, Safek, Eruv, Safek, lo Eruv, lo havi Chamar Gamal. Aval vadai lo Eruv, lo havi Chamar Gamal. I would have thought Rabbi say that Chamar Gamal only applies in the case of Safek, but not in a case where vadai and Eruv was not made. Ella, the Gemara says, Ella afilu vadai lo Eruv havi Chamar Gamal. Rather, we'll say the chiddush is that even in a case where there wasn't a definitive Eruv, right? Where there wasn't an Eruv at all, we'll still go at, for example, in this case where a person didn't place an Eruv, because there's some ambiguity regarding the establishment of his makom shvisa, we'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and we'll utilize Chamar Gamal. So we'll say bottom line is, any time that there's any level of ambiguity regarding your Eruv, we always apply the Chamar Gamal standard, which means that your Eruv essentially is measured in a way that causes you the greatest loss of distance. Good. Says the Mishnah. We'll say now another fascinating halacha. Mi sheyatza chutz letchum afilu ama achas. So we'll say now in the case over here is, I wandered outside of the tchum. I wandered outside of the tchum. So the Gemara says, so what happens? Look at Rashi. Mi sheyatza chutz letchum b'mezid umidas shelo l'shem mitzvah. So I'll say, so now we're looking a little above a different case over here. So I wandered out of the tchum, b'mezid intentionally, and without das, and obviously again, not for the sake of any kind of mitzvah. So mishi yatzachos l'tchum, afilu ama achas, even by just one ama, lo yikanes, you cannot enter back into the tchum. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, shtayim yikanes, shalosh lo yikanes. Well, so remember again, we saw this shita of Rabbi Eliezer, I think last week. So Rabbi Eliezer says, no. If you wander out up to 2 amas, you could come back in. So we'll say, if you remember again, what's Rabbi Eliezer's logic? We saw this. Rabbi Eliezer holds that every person has dalet amas. Right? Remember again, and when looking at your dalet amas, how do we view your dalet amas? So we'll say, what we essentially view is you are always in the middle. You are situated in the middle of your dalet amas. So therefore, halacha l'mais, Rabbi Eliezer says, if you wander up to 2 amos out of the tchum, you could come back in. Why? Because as long as you're within 2, you're still in your own personal space. More than 2 is going to be problematic. So we'll say, so therefore again, fundamental machlokes, somebody goes, I'm using the word wander, but it's not really wander. I exited the tchum. So the shaila is, can I go back in? Tanakama is saying, Chacham is saying, no, you cannot go back in even 1 amma. Rabbi Eliezer is saying, up to 2 ammas, you can go back in. Right? Look at Rashi. Shtaim yikanis mishum havloas tchumen. Fine. So says the Gemara, Amr Rabbi Chanina, it's also an interesting case. Amr Rabbi Chanina, Raglo achas besoch hatchum, the Raglo achas chutz letchum, lo yikanes. So let's listen to this case. What happens if I put 1 foot in the tchum, and I wandered 1 foot out of the tchum? So I stepped over the tchum, but just 1 foot. So 1 foot's in the tchum, 1 foot's out of the tchum. We'll say, a lot of us live life like this, right? Where one foot is where it should be, and 1 foot is where it shouldn't be. I often find myself straddling different worlds. So one foot is in the tchum, one foot is outside of the tchum. So what's the halacha Rabosai? Lo yikanes. You cannot come back into the tchum. You cannot come back into the tchum. D'chsev im tashiv misheves raglecha. So what's this actually very interesting. So the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Yeshaya that says literally im tashiv misheves raglecha, which means I will say, if you go ahead and restrain your foot. Now the truth is, the way Chazal discuss this halacha, what this pasuk is used for, is actually talking about the idea, we saw this Masech Shabbos, you don't run on Shabbos, for example. We're not supposed to run on Shabbos, except if it's like for a Dvar Mitzvah, like to run to Shul, to run to a Shir. You don't run on Shabbos. Why? Because you're walking on Shabbos is supposed to be different than it is during the week. So as the Gemara dashes, Im Tashib B'Shabbos halacha, if you restrain your foot on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, listen to this. So Tashib B'Shabbos raglecha ksiv. It says raglecha means your foot. So I'll say, interestingly enough, what do you see? What does it mean if you restrain your foot? What's the case if you restrain your foot? Oh, that's the case where you took one step over the tchum. And what is the pasuk saying? You can't step back in. You're stuck. Can't step back in. So says the Gemara. I'm sorry. Raglo achas b'sochat chum, raglo achas chutz l'tchum yikanis. But yet I have a brayso that says that if one foot is in the tchum, one foot is outside of the tchum, you could step back into the tchum. Hamani, what's his opinion? Is that achirim? That's the achirim. Because what do the achirim hold? This sanya, achirim omrim l'makom sherubahu niskar. This is beautiful. The achirim say that your location is determined where the majority of your body is. So therefore, the fact that you have one foot outside of the tchum, halacha l'maisa, doesn't make you outside of the tchum. Rather, we look where the majority of your body is. And if the majority of your body is inside of the tchum, then you are considered to be inside of the tchum, and you could bring that foot that is now outside of the tchum back into the tchum. Ike de Amri, both say others explain, Amra bichanina, raglo achas besochat tchum, v'raglo achas chutz l'tchum yikanes. So the Chanina says, if you have one foot in the tchum, one foot outside of the tchum, you could bring that foot back in. D'chsev im tashiv misheves raglecha karina. So I'll say, even though it's written raglecha singular, it's pronounced raglecha like a yod, which means your feet, which I will say ultimately again means the only time that is problematic if you leave the tchum is if you leave the tchum with both feet. But the pasuk says that you can't come back into the tchum if you moved one foot out of the tchum. Dehuda amar ki achirim, the sanya l'makom sherubahu niskar. Pasuk is like the achirim say that your location is governed by where the majority of your body is. And I will say that is indeed how the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if halacha l'maisa you move one foot out of the tchum, you could bring your foot back in. Why? Because your location is determined ultimately, again, by where the majority of your body is. And I will say that is not just the din ultimately in Eruvin, that is the fundamental din in tshuva as well. Why is tshuva possible? Because you will say a lot of times in life, like we said before, I put my foot over the tchum. And even sometimes a person might even put both of his feet over his tchum. But we believe that what? The ikar of you, right? The rove of you is never over the tchum. Even if halacha l'maisa, one foot is there, even if halacha l'maisa, no tshuva, 2 feet are over the tchum, we go after where the rove of you is. And the rove of a Jew is always with the Ribbon Shalom. Even if the miyut is somewhere else, the rove of the Jew is always with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because the rove of me is with the Ribbon Shalom, therefore, I always have the ability to come back. I always have the ability to come back in the tchum. We always judge you by where the majority of you is. And the majority of me is always with the Ribbon Shalom. It's an incredible halacha. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Shtayim Yikanes, Shalosh Lo Yikanes. Rabbi Eliezer says, again, if you wandered out up to 2 amas, you can come back in. But more than 2 amas, you can't come back in. I says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Achos Yikanes, Shtayim Lo Yikanes. Oh, 1 second, but I have a brayso. The brayso says that Rabbi Eliezer holds, if you go out 1 amma, you could come back in. 2 amas, you can't come back in. To which the Gemara says, Lo Kashya, Hada Akar Chada, V'kam atarti, hada akatarti v'kam atlas. Well, this is very interesting. So we'll say it depends. So the Bryce is just talking about something a little bit different. So we'll say when the Bryce says achas yikanes shtayim lo yikanes, that's talking about you walked 1 amma and are about to walk the 2nd amma. So if you're mid 2nd amma, you can still come back in. Once you've walked 2 ammas and are mid 3rd amma, then you can't come back in. So the Gemara says, good. So that's what it means. Lo kasha hada akar chada the kamatarti. One is talking about again where you walked one amma and are about to walk the second. As long as you have not completed the second, you could still come back in. Hada akar tarti the kamatlas. Once you've walked already 2 ammas and gone ahead and what about to walk the third, then halacha l'maisa you're too far out of the tchum, you cannot come back in. So the Gemara says, Vatanya, what we learned, Rabbi Eliezer Omer afilu amma achas lo yikanes. Yet we also have another brayse. The other brayse says, Rabbi Eliezer says that even one amma, even if you just walked one amma out of the tchum, you can't come back in. So what's the pshat with that? To which the Gemara says, Kitanyahi lemoded. Ultimately, again, what is that referring to? That is referring to ultimately again moded. So we'll say moded means a person who goes ahead and is measuring out their tchum by literally walking. We saw this last week that let's say again I have a makom shvisa and I don't know what my tchum is. So what does the Gemara say? Walk 2,000 average steps. 2,000 average steps is 2,000 amas. That's the Gemara said. So I'll say, so interestingly enough, this is actually quite fascinating. If you're measuring out your tchum by just walking, the Gemara suggested that according to Rabbi Eliezer, your tchum ends where it ends and there's no additional space. In other words, we both say, even Rabbi Eliezer, who will normally say, you have up to 2 amas, up to 2 additional amas outside of your tchum, Rabbi Eliezer holds that if you're actually measuring your tchum by taking 2,000 steps, the tchum ends where it ends, and you have no additional space under those circumstances. If you take a look at, let's finish. The Gemara says, because we'll say when you are actually measuring out your tchum by actually taking steps. So we'll say, so for example, you're taking 2,000 steps. Even if your tchum ends in the middle of a cave. Now, remember again, we spoke about this before, that if your tchum ends in the middle of an enclosed area, that's what? That you have the rest of that area. You have the rest of that area in order to go ahead you have the rest of that area as your tchum. This comes up most notably, I will say, if your tchum ends in a walled city. So remember again, you normally have that entire walled city. But let's hold something very interesting, that in a case where you are measuring out your tchum, by taking steps, halacha l'maisa, the tchum ends where the tchum ends, and you have no additional space. Now, why that is, that's going to be a sugya by on its own. So what the Gemara is suggesting over here is as follows. That therefore, again, that's what it means. It says someone who's measuring out his tchum, even if my tchum ends in a cave, I don't have the whole cave. Rather, I just have until where my tchum actually ended with my 2,000 steps. So we'll see, we quote something, Mr. Rosh says, Sugya and Samech Beis, we'll discuss this, why Rabbi Eliezer holds this way. So we'll say what comes out, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is as follows, that halacha l'maisa, if you go out of your tchum, as long as you're within 2 amas of your tchum, you could come back in. The exception to this rule apparently is when you are measuring out your tchum by actually taking 2,000 steps, your tchum ends where the tchum ends, and you have no additional space under those circumstances. Why Rabbi Eliezer holds that way? Emir Hashem we'll see in the Sugya on Samech Beis. Mishnah, let's finish the parak together. Mishnah, afilu ama achos lo yikanes. Well, this is an interesting case. I'm traveling on Shabbos, and it turns out that I don't get into the tchum of the city I wanted to get to, so I end up being 1 amma outside of the tchum by the time Shabbos starts, right? It happens, right? It's all about timing and location. So what happens? So mamish, like I end Shabbos, Shabbos starts, and I'm mamish 1 amma out of the tchum. 1 amma out of the tchum. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Lo yikanes. Well, what are you going to do? You can't come in. You did not make it into the tchum for Shabbos. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, you're stuck. So we'll say, obviously, it's somewhere where a person didn't make a makom shvisa. Because again, obviously, if you know you're not going to reach your desired location, there is an easy remedy for that. Create a makom shvisa. You have 2,000 amas from there. But again, the situation over here is a person didn't do that. He ended up 1 amma outside of his city, of his desired location. Erev Shabbos, he can't enter in. Rabbi Shimon says, listen to this. It's pretty wild. Afilu 15 amos yikanes. Even up to 15 amos outside of the tchum of your city, of your desired location, you could still enter in. Wow. Why? Because Because let's listen to this. It's actually quite beautiful. Apparently, it used to be that cities had tchum markers, right? You know, like the big signs. You are now entering, or you're now leaving the tchum, or now entering the tchum. So they used to have tchum markers. So mostly that's how I know I'm traveling to city A. My intention was to leave early enough on Erev Shabbos to get into the tchum of city A. Now Mamish Shabbos starts, and I realize I'm 1 amma outside. I see, welcome to city A, welcome to the tchum of city A. I see the sign, I'm 1 amma away, Shabbos starts, what am I going to do? I'm stuck outside, I can't enter into the city on Shabbos. So comes along Rabbi Shimon and says, no, that's not true. The measurers of the tchum would always go ahead and place the tchum markers a little bit closer to the city than the actual 2,000 amas. Why did they do that? Because what I say human nature is we push the envelope and live a little bit on the line, live a little bit on the edge. So therefore what they did was they pushed back the tchum markers to within 2,000 amas to make sure people would not leave the tchum. Now the good news, says Rabbi Shimon, is as long as you're within 15 amas of the tchum marker, you're good to go. Now we'll say Rashi has a whole discussion over here. Does 15 amas actually mean 15 amas or not? So is that a specific number, or is that just saying as long as you're close to the tchum? The problem, of course, with saying as long as you're close to the tchum is that's very amorphous and ambiguous. I'm just pointing out that's a discussion in Rashi. We'll just go with Pasha Pshad that 15 amas means 15 amas. So it says the Gemara will say Tana mipnei toe hamida. So inachinami the Gemara says that is correct. That look at Rashi mipnei atoin mipnei toe hamida she'im akir nesasimin upam holchen la'alam mimenu v'cholzin v'lavadatayu. So both says therefore the Gemara says inachinami. What they used to do is they would place the tchum markers closer to the city. They would not put the tchum markers really at the edge of 2,000 amas. Because people make mistakes. Again, people make mistakes. It's not talking about somebody who's looking to purposely violate and flagrantly violate the halacha. People just make mistakes for a whole variety of different reasons. So because people make mistakes, pull the tchum markers a little bit closer to the city. That way if somebody does wander a little bit past the tchum, they're still okay. And therefore, halacha l'maaseh, the Gemara says, if you're within 15 amas of the tchum of your desired destination, know that you're okay, know that you're permitted to enter, because in reality, you have actually reached your tchum. Hadjun Allah. Misho Tzio Bosai, Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov, Shkoyach. And Meretz Hashem will start the new parak tomorrow. Shkoyach.